So really there's three parts to my talk. Where are we now with the drought situation? What's the outlook for the growing season? And what tools can we use to plan for climate variability? And they're the kind of tools I'm talking about are mostly things dealing with how you can plan for El Nino or La Nina. Probably won't have a whole lot of time to do that, but I can stay afterwards if you have any additional questions. So the current drought situation in Georgia looks like this. There's a new one that came out this morning. I didn't have the time to grab it. But you can see that the core of the worst drought, the darkest red colors, are what we call a D4 drought, which is once every 50 to 100 years or so. And that is located sort of in the center part of Georgia here. A lot of that is long-term water deficits. They've had some rain in the last couple weeks, so that's good. And that's slowly going to be eroding probably over the next few weeks. But that has been a real problem. This year, and I'll show this in just a minute, the drought has really been south of Atlanta. So Atlanta is the really big media thing. If there's a drought in Atlanta, there's a drought in the state. And if there's not a drought in Atlanta, nobody cares, which is really too bad because for a lot of people, this drought this year is worse than the 2007 to 2009 drought. For some parts of the state, definitely worse. And so that's a real issue. There's other parts of the state, especially up here in the northwest. Probably not too many of you are from up there, but there they've had flooding because they've had so much rain this year. Just for comparison from last year to this year, this is January of 2012. See, there was a broad area with drought. A lot of that went away over the early part of the summer, except for this core area where that drought has continued. Some of this also got eaten away by some tropical storms. We had Tropical Storm Debbie that went through Florida here and gave some rain to the southern part of the state. Tropical Storm Beryl went along the coast, and so that helped to eat away a little bit at that. And Isaac was at one point predicted to give us about 10 inches of rain, but as you know, it moved off to the west. It flooded out Louisiana, and we really didn't see a whole lot from that. A little piece of it broke off in Ohio and came back south over Georgia, but did not give us a lot of rain. If you want to compare, this is a timeline of drought. It just shows the percent of the state that has drought, and the different colors correspond to how severe the drought is. This starts in 2000 of January and goes forward in time. So here's where we are now. See, when I came to Georgia in 2001, we were in the middle of a drought. That kind of waxed and waned a little bit, but ended in about 2002. It went away for good. We had several years with a lot of rain there, and those were years when we also had a lot of tropical activity. Hurricane Ivan and Hurricane Katrina gave us some rain, and several other hurricanes all came through and gave us a lot of rain. So that was a pretty wet period. Then we had the drought of 2007 to 2009, which started out in the southeast part of the state. There were all those fires near Waycross. You may remember that in the news. Got pretty severe, and you can see this drought at the maximum extent, which is in December of 2007, was covering the entire northern part of the state, but not so much in the southeast. And that was the one where in Athens they were talking about running out of water in 6 weeks, and they had monitors in the bathrooms at the stadium to make sure that nobody flushed the toilet too often, and you know, crazy things like that. And of course the talk in Atlanta was that they were going to run out of water in Lake Lanier. The media really does have a big impression on what you think the drought is. Now, since that time, we had another wet year in 2009 to 2010. But since then, the drought has really come back. You see, now the drought's really concentrated in the southern part of the state. This was the maximum extent right here in the end of 2010 into 2011. But if you compare the average, or the total amount of the state that's covered by severe drought, that red color, it's lasted longer in the present drought, and a higher percentage of the state has been covered by the drought. So as I said, I've talked to a number of farmers that have said their farm ponds have completely dried up this year where it didn't last time, and they have nothing but fish bones left, and that's been a real problem. Also, a number of well diggers, I think, have been busy deepening wells in certain parts of the state. Recent rainfalls, this I grabbed from this morning. This is the last 7 days departure from normal. See, all the areas that are in blue are above normal rainfall in the last week. You almost draw this nice diagonal line here. The southeast has really gotten practically no rain at all. The front has really kind of died out, and there's not a lot going on. Down here is the last 90 days, so it's October, November, and December. percent of normal, and you can see that there's really just a strip here that has gray conditions, which is normal or higher if it was in green. But almost the entire state of Georgia has been below normal for the last 3 months. And there's some areas here down in the far southeast that have been less than 25% of normal. So those areas are really hurting. And it shows up in the stream flows as well. Green shows areas where there's normal stream flow, or blue where there's above normal. There's been some flooding up there. Most of the rest of the state is in this red or orange, which is the lowest 10% of all stream flows. So if you get water from the streams, that's a real problem because the levels are so low that you're just not really able to do that. In fact, the Flint River down here has been setting records for how low they are. And so a lot of those areas just really have not received much rain at all. They've come up a little bit in the recent rains, but not a lot. This is the Flint River. This is the average, what you'd expect to see over time. This is the actual values. You can see every time it rains, it goes up, maybe even to normal for a day or two, but it sinks right back down because the groundwater levels are so low. There's just not a lot there to sustain it. It's been coming up a little bit, but it's still a lot below normal. This is a groundwater well in Mitchell County down in the southwest. And the green here shows the range of average values. The blues show above normal. The orange here shows between normal and the 30% lowest. And then the darker red here shows the lowest 10%. You can see the red line here is just skirting on the bottom. They've been setting record lows for groundwater in that aquifer. It's about a 200-foot aquifer for the last year. So they've been continuing to run these really, really low values. Now, if we look ahead and say what's going to happen in the next few weeks and months, this is a forecast for rainfall in the next 5 days. You can see, and I pulled this off just a few minutes ago, again, the southeast and the southern part of Georgia is really getting missed by a lot of this rain. The storm pattern has been set up to go along here, and there's been a lot of flooding, but there's not a lot happening down in the southern part of Georgia. And that's going to continue with this storm as it moves off. We'll probably, there might be a little bit of snow up in northern Georgia. More likely they're going to see a lot in the mountains of North Carolina and things like that. Not going to be too much of an effect, but makes a lot of press excited. If we look at the next month, this is the forecast from the Climate Prediction Center. Next month they're predicting that we're going to be above normal in temperature. Well, that's kind of a no-brainer because we have been above normal for the first couple months. In fact, in Athens, we've been having record high minimum temperatures where the minimum temperature for the day is above the normal average high temperature. It's been that warm. It's really been interesting to see that. We're going to cool off now as this front comes through, so we won't have those record temperatures for the next few days at least. And they're also predicting that for Georgia for January, again based on what we've already seen partly, we're going to be above normal in rainfall for most of the state. Now, I would agree with that in northern Georgia. I'm not so sure about southern Georgia. They're just basing that on persistence. This is the forecast for January, February, and March, so the early spring on into planting season. And the forecast for temperature shows an increased chance of above normal temperatures, especially out in the southwest, but extending all the way into Georgia. So basically what that is saying is that there's probably about a 50% chance of above normal, but there's also some chance still of normal or below normal. Precipitation, it's white here, which means equal chances. In other words, they say there's a 30% chance of above normal, 30% chance of near normal, and 30% chance of below normal. In other words, for precipitation, there's no skill. It's just a crapshoot what you get. So there's no predictability of that. But there is some usefulness in knowing that it's likely to be warmer than usual in the spring, because it means we could see another spring like last year where the temperatures warm up early. That means soil temperatures might also warm up early. So that could affect planting. Would also affect the development of pests, of fungus and things like that. So certainly something that you'd have to watch for and stay right on top of. The water outlook, if you look in the drought areas, normal rainfall just keeps us from getting worse. It doesn't make it go away. There's some improvement over the winter in general. because temperatures are cold, so there's not a lot of evaporation. There's not a lot going on with the plants. But we really need to have above normal rainfall to get rid of that drought altogether. And we only have about a 33% chance of that happening. So it's likely that we're going to continue to see some soil moisture problems in at least the short haul. Oops, let me go back here. With the warmer temperatures, we're going to see more evaporation. That means that there's likely to be more stress on plants. And so that's something to watch for. In northern Georgia, I don't think anybody's too worried about that. But again, there's not a lot of peanuts that are grown there either. And so you're not going to see much in the media about it, because the media don't pay attention unless it's Atlanta. I also want to just point out a few tools that you can use if you're interested in looking at the effects of climate variability on predictions of temperature and precipitation. A couple of websites that are useful if you do web things are agroclimate.org, which is a website that's been put together by the Southeast Climate Consortium, which is a group of about 8 universities across the Southeast. And Agro Climate, I'll show you some of the information on that in a minute. Of course, GeorgiaWeather.net is the University of Georgia Automated Weather Network. I imagine a fair number of you already use that for looking at soil moisture and soil temperature conditions. If you don't, it's a good place to get that information, because it's more localized, although it's certainly not going to replace whatever you have in your own field. We'll give you some information as well. Agro Climate, as I said, is produced by a bunch of different universities all working together. And it's really focused on El Nino and La Nina. It's the strongest signal we have of year-to-year variability in climate. You can go in and use the tools. This is what the main web page looks like. On the left-hand side, there's a bunch of monthly climate summaries, agricultural outlooks, and things like that. There's also a section here called Agro Climate Tools. And if you go to that, there's a bunch of different tools that are available. Climate risk will help you figure out what is your likelihood of above or below normal temperature and precip based on what phase El Nino is. There's drought indices, crop yield. There's a couple different things you can look at with crop yield. There's regional yield maps and also a planting date planner. I'll talk about that in just a minute. And there's some crop diseases, degree days, and other things like that as well. This is a picture of what the regional yield map looks like. You can go in and pick your crop, and this one happens to be peanuts. And you can select your El Nino phase. For those of you who don't know, El Nino is an unusual warming off the coast of Peru and Ecuador in the eastern Pacific Ocean. And it really acts, that warm air acts kind of like putting a rock into a river. It changes the flow of the river around it. And so when we have an El Nino, it tends to shift the subtropical jet stream, which pushes all our rainstorms around one way or the other. And in this case, we're in neutral conditions, which means there is not really a strong cooling there. There's not a strong warming there. It's just near average conditions. And in years when we have neutral conditions, in the peanut growing region of the Southeast, we see the yields tend to be low under neutral conditions. That's based on long-term statistical yields. And they've taken those yields and detrended them for changes in variety and things like that. But it does show that in neutral years, yields tend to be lower. So you're going to really want to work to try to maximize the yield in whatever way you can. Surprisingly, both El Nino years and La Nina years have better yields. There's an early signal that we might be going into another La Nina next year. It's a long way down the road. It's hard to predict that far in advance. Another thing that it has on the tools is a planting date planner, where you can go and look at historically using some crop models. If you put in a particular set of years, either El Nino years or La Nina years, and you put in a plant, you plant a seed at a certain date, what will that do to the yield? This is what it looks like. Again, we picked for peanuts. You can pick for your county. And then there's also things like picking for soil, picking for whether it's irrigated or rain-fed, and then looking at the climate conditions, or you can look at all years as well. And just picking a couple different planting dates, April 16 and May 1 here, showing what the likelihood is of a yield of a different amount just based on planting date and those different parameters you picked. If you pick on April 16, or if you plant on April 16 or on May 1st, the chance of a really low yield is not very high. chance of a moderate yield is increased, and the chance of a large yield is increased. A lot of that has to do with whether or not the plant's mature. Okay, that should make good sense to you. You don't want to be planting in June, because the plants are just not going to have time to mature and the quality will go down. But you can go and play around with that and see what happens if it's irrigated versus non-irrigated and things like that. Another tool that's available on Agro Climate is a peanut leaf spot indicator. So it tells you something about the risk of peanut leaf spot. If you click on that, you go in and it lets you choose your state. I just picked Georgia, and it shows you a map which has little symbols here at each of the University of Georgia weather stations to tell you what the likelihood of risk is for peanut leaf spot disease based on the weather that they've seen in the last few weeks. You can click on there and get more information. If you do that, it shows you how the risk has changed over time. And this is day by day, so you can see for the last 10 days or so that the risk has gone up. And if you go in and calculate your local risk, you can actually do that too. It gives you a series of picked boxes. You can pick how many days since you last sprayed, how many times it's rained, and how many times you've irrigated. So I just picked some numbers for that and did the calculation, and it showed that for that particular set of situations, I was at a medium risk and they recommend a spray. Now it's a pretty simple tool. A lot of you are pretty sophisticated about that, and so it may or may not be useful, but it's a good check of what your own thinking is. Some of those peanut tools are also available at georgiaweather.net. This is the network that's run by the University of Georgia. They've got about 80 stations across the state. If you haven't looked at it yet, you might want to see if there's a station that's close to you. They do have some tools here listed for peanuts on the left margin. Some of the things that are probably the most useful are their maps of soil temperature and soil moisture. This is a map from a couple days ago of the soil temperature. This is at 4 inches, but they do have a couple other inches. I think they also have 4 inches, or 2 inches and 8 inches. So you can get a feel for what the vertical profile of temperature is. And you can see there's a scale here on the right-hand side which shows what the average soil moisture temperature is for that date. You can go in and look to see for your area, what's the soil temperature? Is it time to think about planting, or is it too early? Soil moisture is also available at 12 inches based on those same sensors. Obviously, this is not going to be any kind of substitute for knowing your own field, but it does give you a first look at what's going on generally across the area. They also have current weather conditions. They update every 5 to 15 minutes depending on the station, and that can give you information about the wind speed and direction, as well as humidity and other things like that that might be useful to you. And I want to just thank the Georgia Peanut Commission, because they do help support that. So when you're paying dues for the Peanut Commission, that will help to support the use of this product. And we'd love to be able to do more things for you as well. It's a question of knowing what the best tools are to help develop. All right, well, thanks for coming, and I'm happy to stay up here for a few minutes and discuss questions. If you need one of these pesticide certificates, come and tell me, and I'll be happy to give one to you.